My name is Vito Scaletta. I was born in Sicily in 1925. That little guy's me. I'm standing there with my parents and my sister Francesca in front of our old house.
Vito might as well take over this review since he'd know better than I would. Anyway, Vito Scaletta and his family immigrated to the United States from Sicily when he was a child to escape the poverty back home and live the American dream. However, life turned out just as hard, and although Vito was able to go to school, crime seemed like the only option.
That's where I met Joe.
Vito, hurry it up. We ain't got all night.
After Vito became best friends with Joe Barbaro, they robbed stores and threatened people, but after Vito got caught one night, he chose to join the army in the middle of a war to avoid jail time.
Operation Husky, 504th Parachute.
2 years later, he returned to Empire City on leave after being wounded during battle, until Joe gave him counterfeit papers to discharge him from the army.
Joe, you want to get into trouble again?
Mama, would you rather me go back and get shot again?
However, since his return, he found out his father left the family with $2,000 of debt due in just a week, and feeling like he has no other choice, he becomes part of the life again, slowly climbing up the mafia ranks, spending a bit of time in prison, becoming a made man, while also triggering a war between two giant gangs and finding themselves in a deep hole struggling to climb out of.
You are entering the Society of the Chosen, a society which does not exist to the rest of the world. Our family means more to you from now on than your own family.
Again, it's really hard to explain the plot and not spoil too much given the multiple twists and turns. Like the predecessor, it carries that ideal that a person doesn't choose to be involved in that way of life, but it came to them based on the environment and circumstances. Except the main protagonist has a different upbringing and pathway. Vito has a debt to pay, and with his connections, crime was the only way to pay it off in time, which creates a chain of events to another. Really, without spoiling the plot too much, all it is someone screwing you over and getting payback on them almost immediately.
We're done with the small-time jobs. It's time to make some real shuttle.
What stood out to me the most is the intensity in some of the cutscenes, that sense of danger of being part of that life. Some of the violent moments are brutal. The bosses get really pissed off when things go wrong. I mean, when Mafia II came out, this used the F word more times than any other game, a Guinness World Record until Grand Theft Auto swore in its face for its pitiful effort in comparison. And this scene near the beginning of the game, for example, when Derek calls Joe to confirm Vito's story about the two being best friends with a gun on the desk. I thought there was going to be a twist that Joe would say he had no idea.
Sorry, pal, I had to check you out.
It's effective in keeping the player on the edge when the moment calls for it, and at least when I played it, I was always second guessing. However, even with that said, the rest of the characters apart from Leo and Henry are all forgettable. Like, I didn't even know who I was going up against in the final mission, as in I didn't remember any of the previous meetings with that person until I replayed certain parts of the game again for review purposes.
Why, you want to wash your shorts before we do this?
Wise ass.
Although the chemistry between Vito and Joe is surprisingly solid with all their wisecracks and what they go through, even if Vito appears to have a generic personality, at least compared to Tommy. But then you'd have to have one to survive.
You're young, you're smart, and you've proven you can keep your mouth shut. You're exactly the type of guy everybody wants working for him.
I don't know, it treads the line between superficial and developed. These characters, they all make for compelling cutscenes, but most of them just aren't memorable to me. And although writer Daniel Vavra claims the first Mafia is a straight tribute to gangster movies, a romantic vision, and that Mafia II is meant to represent more closely to what gangster life was like in reality, nah, that isn't true at all.
Thinks he's a gangster, though. Spends too much damn time at the movies.
Well, if the kid's got you for a role model, he's in for a lot of trouble.
I probably lost count of the number of Godfather references in this game. I wonder what this chapter reminds me of. And even a lot of the licensed music on the radio is taken from movies, including Speedoo from the Cadillacs, Long Tall Sally from Little Richard, and In the Steel of the Night from the Five Satans, to name a few. That said, I'm glad they did that because this game has a great soundtrack, original and licensed. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of these elements of Mafia life in this game, trying to survive, earn respect on the inside, are all true to some extent, and I'm not even saying it's a bad thing. Visually it looks stunning, the cinematic angles, the facial animations, it looks very dark but vibrant at the same time, and despite the gameplay, time. It abridges the pacing less than the predecessor, and with evolving game hardware and the custom engine, it can be presented better. It's just more obvious than the predecessor, and because that lack of originality affects the gameplay as well, which I'll get to, I blame it on the troubles the developers had to go through just to release it in the first place.
And my wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless.
Exodus, chapter 22, verse 24.
After the release of Mafia: The City of Lost Heaven, the script was being written in just the next year and entered pre-production the year after that. Developed once again by Illusion Softworks in the Czech Republic, it was originally designed for the 6th generation like the predecessor with a licensed game engine so development wouldn't take as long. But after the supplier went out of business in 2005, Illusion shifted focus to the next generation of consoles and created their own game engine, which took so much time. They claimed they weren't able to focus on gameplay no earlier than 2008, and it meant they could only put most of their focus on the style and presentation.
But it's nice out here, ain't it? I ain't been in the woods for a while.
Yeah? You won't be liking it so damn much after I smack you with this shovel.
Empire City is a new map which once again is based off the same cities: Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, Detroit, and primarily New York. It uses other parts of the city into one. Blurred lighting, the old film colors, the aforementioned radio music playing in the background. It has a great atmosphere. It's not as big of a map as the first game despite having next generation hardware. Like, they seem to have everything in the City of Lost Heaven: a racetrack, an airport, though I suppose not having a racetrack reduces the risk of PTSD from players who experienced that racing level from the predecessor. There's also no loading times while traveling, and the entire map is unlocked from the start. And because the story is set into, 4 different timelines if you include the prologue and prison stint, the world evolves around Vito over time, and there's always a storyline reason for it. The vehicles and their performance change, you get additional weapon types, and even the weather is different. So I was worried for a moment that the whole game was going to be set in snow. But yeah, some of the DNA from the first Mafia is here.
You know something? One of these days, I'm gonna buy a house here.
Look at this guy. Ain't even back a day and he's too good for his old neighborhood.
Hey, what are you breaking my balls for? I'm just window shopping.
We're looking at the Xbox 360 version because unlike the PC version of its predecessor, there's no Elite version and I got it dirt cheap. You might get a bit of screen tearing and the occasional slow frame rate during the in-game cutscenes at worst. Though had I not been playing this in the middle during the release of the definitive version which came out last month, I'd probably use that version. But whatever, I'd say the 360 version in 1080p is good enough to make a full review. That's what matters most to me. Another thing that returns is the strict road rules where even the most minor of offenses like speeding, colliding with traffic, running red lights, even having a weapon on conceal can result in either a ticket, arrest, or termination if caught. After my experience with the first Mafia game, the second I got in the wheel of my first car, my instinct was to not drive too fast in case there was a speed limit.
You know, you wasn't kidding. They really taught you to drive over there. At least something good come out of it.
Now, there were a couple of comments of the predecessor's review telling me that you can see where the police are on the radar. True, yes, but if you play it today in full HD, now that dot represents where the police are. Zoom out the footage. I mean, what am I gonna do? Might as well not be there. Whereas Mafia 2, I can clearly see them on the map HUD. Therefore, I'm more inclined to break the speed limit because like the predecessor, cars have limiters that you can either turn on or off, and it's also handy as a second brake. Speed limits also vary, with some highways and bridges going up to 80 miles per hour, which is more than the maximum top speed for some cars. And speaking of performance, thanks to the advancement of technology over the decade, cars are faster and easier to handle. Like, they don't feel like they're going half the speed they're actually going. Now, not every single model is a sports car, because this was also a time when cars were the size of a mountain, but because they feel like better cars to drive than the predecessor, it's not worth bringing so much attention to, basically. And I've always liked how there was a speed limit, so you have the pressure to go as fast as possible. And despite a couple of moments, the police are more lenient than the first game. I mean, did I say passing a red light counts as an offense?
Hey, you just blew the light.
Well, the police didn't seem to mind. Just avoid speeding and collisions in their presence and you should be fine.
In pursuit of a hit-and-run driver.
However, if you commit something in Escape, even if it's during a mission where you have no other choice, sometimes they have something to trace your footpath, like a number plate, or the fact that Vito is simply a wanted person throughout different phases of the story. A minor feature to note, but I think it's very clever and should be used in other open world games. To reduce the heat, there's a garage to change your number plate and vehicle color, finally bringing in some much needed customization options, and you can store up to 10 cars in your garage next to your safe house. I mean, it's nothing compared to the first game. The Salieri gang could probably switch business priorities and become a car dealership with what you see here, but thanks to the quicker gameplay, things feel less tedious. Mind you, repairing a car when it's damaged can be expensive, and so can having different outfits.
Oh, nice threads. Thanks.
I have to say, looking at what they have in store, I take back what I said about GTA 4 not having that many outfit options, because is this it? And you don't even get to see what outfits on Vito look like before you buy them. And as for weapons, nah, they're not customizable, but then they don't need to be because the weapon count doubles from the predecessor. And you can now carry as many in your pocket as you want, loaded with a higher ammo arsenal. You can see where this is going.
That'll teach 'em. Yeah.
Looking back on the first Mafia, that one had, how can I put this, special controls where everything felt like it came from the 1930s. You either loved it, hated it, or in my case hated it initially and grew to respect the length the developers went to make it realistic and rewarding when completing a mission. Mafia 2 on the other hand, well, I suppose checkpoints can be minimal and your health goes down just as quickly. You can even die with one hit if you're not careful, and enemies are quite accurate with their weapons. But since health regenerates, I wasn't exactly resorting to the same unconventional methods as the predecessor, because like the driving mechanics, this feels unbelievably conservative in comparison. It has a proper cover system, a loose auto aim for the console version, partners don't have health bars, so having Joe on your side is incredibly helpful. There's even a moment where it pokes fun at the predecessor for its slow gameplay.
Jeez, all this for 10 lousy bucks?
Although it has a few stealth missions too, it's a standard third-person shooter.
This one's mine. Think of something. Hurry up here.
And when it comes to the melee sections where you have a choice of light and heavy attacks, by the time you learn the counter, that's all you need to do, because to dodge attacks, you literally hold the dodge button. No timing, just hold it. And all you do is counter until you have a chance to enter a combo. But it still feels very awkward somehow, like it's stuck in the 6th generation. With the way Vito moves, the animations aren't fluent compared to other games released at that time. A lot of different actions use the same button and fades to black when you perform them, like opening doors or climbing ladders. Like they didn't have enough time to polish everything, which I'll get to. But compared to the predecessor, it feels less clunky and frustrating with barely any sense of danger apart from a few exceptions where there were no safe spots. Which means, theoretically, I should be enjoying this more. I have a better time understanding what's going on in the story and given many chances to drown in the game's atmosphere.
Back me up, Vito. All right, go.
But no, actually.
What?
What?
And why is that? Why do I feel a little underwhelmed after completing it? I guess I'm just surprised by how much easier it was. Like I said before, the moment I got in my first car, I was anticipating more of the same thing in Empire Bay. That realistic mechanics were part of the franchise's identity. I kind of miss it, and I'm curious to know what they'll do with the remake coming out soon. Also, I was hoping there was more to do on this map. Yes, you can make pit stops to garages, clothing stores and gun shops, customization, Playboy magazine collecting, roughening up a few workers, steal cars for Mike. So theoretically, there is more to do on this map than the City of Lost Heaven. But if you're always going to a mission marker telling you to go here, that's a priority. And once you do complete the story, it goes straight to the main menu without any free roam option. It's like the game is discouraging you to find other things to do. I only visited these places once or twice, and there's a period where you lose those things you buy anyway. And speaking of that, the sense of trying to earn respect on the inside, rising in the rankings to become made, the brief excess of gangster life, it all feels very superficial. Like gameplay wise, you don't feel like you have more apart from a faster car and a better looking safe house, which has the same features. A telephone, a fridge, a wardrobe with only 2 outfits, and a bed to advance to the next chapter.
We got a situation here. Grab a gun and meet me at the bar.
I wonder how many times a chapter starts with the phone ringing. But after doing my research, the reason it's like this is because when the developers made the decision to create a custom game engine and focus on the next generation, it meant the designers didn't have enough time to focus on, well, the gameplay. So a narrative-driven experience was the only feasible option. And on top of that, the story was written in isolation from the designers, so a lot of the other planned features were omitted as well. There was even a period where they had to imagine playtesting on paper, hoping it works with whatever story was being written. It was a development hell. And that is why the gameplay of Mafia II is the definition of average. But because it was designed for the story to be the game's driver, does it outweigh the gameplay enough to be worth playing? Well, I certainly liked it. I know I said some of the characters are forgettable on the first playthrough, and it references a lot more movies and TV shows than the developers claim, but it's presented superbly, it provided endless intensity. Just watching the cutscenes rising in the rankings, all these moments felt meaningful. For the first 3/4 of the game, the answer was yes, but then I started to realize how basic the gameplay is, and nothing here stands out. Being able to choose your path, affecting the outcome of the story with over a dozen different endings, or even rise to become a boss and manage your empire would have been awesome ideas for this game. There's nothing like that here. I guess it comes down to what you like to get out of an open world title. If you play these type of games with the intention of completing the story missions first, like I do, it's not much of an issue. And it also comes down to your experience with the predecessor, whether you played that or not, since they have completely different gameplay. Had I reviewed Mafia II and not The City of Lost Heaven before, this would be a very different review. Right, Steve?
Right, Derek.
Mafia II was released for the PC, Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 on August 2010, remastered for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One on May 2020, and included a DLC called Joe's Adventure, which tells the story of Joe while Vito was serving his country. And even though I started playing through this game slowly right after I reviewed the first Mafia, I lost count over how many requests I got to review it. Well, here you go. And in the end, I was like, for the price I paid for this game, $5, I got what I paid for. And for Illusion Softworks, who were purchased by 2K Games and renamed 2K Czech in 2008, it seemingly felt like it was worth the effort. However, when they began development on Mafia 3, they would go through similar levels of headaches. Plenty of staff left in 2011, including Daniel Vava, who would go on to form Warhorse Studios, and later develop Kingdom Come Deliverance. Then a few years later, 2K Games relocated staff of the Czech subsidiary to America, eventually merging with a new studio called Hangar 13, who took major responsibility for Mafia 3. And as for what came out in the end, sorry, that wasn't part of the deal. That is a story for another time.